Well, hello everyone, and just want to thank you very much for inviting me to speak on the topic of the Caprario six-part pieces. I'm quite honored, and I just want to start out by saying that I know that many of you already know quite a few of these pieces quite well. They're some of our most loved repertoire. Uh, I've been playing them myself since the late 70s, and I first learned two of them out of Musica Britannica because they were included in that publication in a purely instrumental form. And it was only later in the early 80s that Richard Charteris published them with an Irish press, and we started to learn that some of them had texts. And that became of great interest to me. And so I get a lot of what today's session is going to be about is considering how the presence of these texts or the ways that Coprario might have used them can influence how we play these pieces that we already know and love. There's no question that uh, we already have some ideas about them, and I hope, knowing that you know them well, that I can respectfully give you some fresh ideas about them that I hope will make our time together valuable tonight. So two of the six-part Caprario pieces actually are fully texted madrigals. Richard Charteris discovered these texts in all places at a library in Pasadena, California, near Los Angeles. And so these do survive as fully texted madrigals. And then several of them have Italian titles, much like many of the five-part Caprario pieces that we all know so well have. But Richard Charteris was actually able to identify that two of those Italian titles in the six-part pieces can actually be associated with a poetic work. They come from Il Pastor Fido of Guarini, and one of the fully texted madrigals is based on a text from that famous 1590 poem of Guarini. So these are distinguished bits of poetry we're going to be looking at today. I will give you an opportunity to play along, but the order in which I'm going to present things to you today is I'll start by always looking at a piece of poetry, then we'll look at the score and either see how the poem is treated in Caprario's score, or how, if we can associate a text with a piece, how it might be understood. And then there'll always be a chance to play along because I recorded all of these with the consort Parthenia in New York City, and actually had some singers join us on some of the pieces. So we'll be able to play along with other viol players and singers in some of these wonderful pieces of music that we know and love. I'm going to have us start with the one we probably all know the best, if I can make that bold claim. It's the one that Richard Charteris published as number 2, Untitled. So if you can pull up your piece of music to that, if you've copied those out and want to play along eventually. And then Ibby has agreed to handle the screen for me. So we're going to start by looking at a poem that I'm going to boldly say we can associate with this familiar consort. So it's actually down near the bottom, Ibby, if you would scroll all the way through. Some of you may have noticed that the text that accompanies the poems here is not complete. These are extracts from a published article in the Journal of the Viola da Gamba Society of America. So if the explanatory texts seem to jump around, it's because they do. But we're going to start by looking at this poem that I'm going to propose rather boldly now, and explain more later, can be associated with this familiar Untitled number 2. This is the final poem of Guarini's huge pastoral tragicommedia, Il Pastor Fido, the Faithful Shepherd. And it was 1590 when it was published in Venice, but already in the next few years, it became well known throughout Europe and was well known in Elizabethan England in both Italian and in quite early translations. Uh, the translation I'm going to present to you now is actually one of the later ones. It kept getting translated throughout the 17th and 18th century. And as early as the 19th century, there was this beautiful English translation that I decided to include in the article. But if you'll see, the Italian text is "O fortunata coppia," "O fortunate couple," or something to that effect. And this final chorus of Pastorfino is the wedding scene of the lead shepherd and shepherdess that are featured through the play, Amaryllis and Myrtillo. So we all know about Amaryllis. She gets talked about a lot. So these are the two main characters among many in the poem. And they finally get married at the end after quite a bunch of ups and downs and amorous highs and lows and lots going on in the land of Arcadia. But so you can see that there is this uh, actually, Guarini even prints the opening words with those caps, "O fortunata," so that we get this sense of this grand wedding chorus. And it's almost a wedding sermon at the end of the huge play. So again, in this 19th century translation, "O pair most happy who in tears have sown and reap in smiles when sorrow's clouds have fled." You can't see that. "How sweet the relish of your bliss at last." This is sort of a wedding sermon. Might we scroll down a little bit more, Ibby? Only Ibby can do this. I can't. There we go. So, when all your sighs and bitter woes are past, O blind and too faint-hearted mortals, learn from hence true good from evil to discern. Really sounds like a sermon, doesn't it? It's the final benediction on this wedding. And then this is an important set of words. "From now on, know this," because I think that it's quite clear where I think Coprario states these words. Now, this is not underlined text like it would be in a real madrigal, but I think Coprario is going to be expressing this part of the poem. And then finally, you get these morals. Remember, at the end of any story, there has to be a series of morals. And one of the morals is, "All delight is not true joy." Well, I think we knew that, right? "Nor all sorrow real annoy." Italian speakers there will think that the English rhyme is charming but a little forced given the Italian. "And the true joy springs from conscious virtue after sufferings." And that's the final moral of the story. So hold thoughts about that poem, and then we'll look at the score a little bit before we play it. And then I hope over the course of the next hour, I can convince you that I had a good reason for choosing this poem from Pastorfino rather than some others that I could have just pulled randomly out of the huge amount of Italian poetry that's out there from the period. So, Ibby, might we look at the score? And this score is from the Peter Ballinger PRB edition that was edited by the very distinguished Richard Charteris, one of the great Coprario scholars. After all, Coprario numbers are C numbers, not for Coprario, but for Charteris, right? But Richard Charteris did this edition, and he didn't associate it with a poem, although he certainly noted the connection to the Pastorfino poems in other pieces in the set. But you can see that this familiar opening, we all know it and love it so well, it's so grand. First of all, if you notice what we would call the key or the mode or the starting pitch, it's in F. And F, even in this part of the Renaissance, you could call it F Lydian or F Lydian with a soft hexachord because it has the B flat in it, was already associated with the outdoors. It's the Arcadian mode. It's the Arcadian key. And that lingers on into the 18th century. Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 of Bach with the hunting horns is in F. Beethoven's Symphony No. 6, the Pastoral, is in F. F and this mode, or eventually this key, are always associated with the outdoors, which is Arcadia is all about the outdoors. So you can see it begins with this canzona-like piece with the viol 3 starting and then everybody else coming in. And it's sort of in the style of a grand Venetian canzona. It's kind of an appropriate wedding canzona for what I would argue is this wedding chorus that ends the piece. And it's a beautiful grand piece. We all love this sound, and we'll get to enjoy it again in a minute or so. But none of the points of imitation in this piece last very long. You know, when we play Jenkins, we expect the whole piece to often be an exploration of one point of imitation in all sorts of different keys and treatments. But Coprario is going from one to the next very quickly, as if outlining lines of madrigal text. So there's no question that this is in the style of a madrigal, even if it's not underlaid with text. Ibby, might we scroll down to measure around measure 30? Oh, forgive me, I was too far. Measure 20. Yes, so I hope it's not chopped off by the edge of the by the pictures on your screen. But in measure 22, or the end of 21, you'll see some eighth notes that go yum ba da da da. I'm afraid it's probably chopped off, but that is the only time in this piece of Coprario where all six players rhetorically do the exact same rhythm at the same time. So I want to argue that that is the rhetorical moment where the poet says, "Now know this, not all sorrow is bad." So it's the rhetorical moment, and then the succeeding points of imitation propose all the things that we could have learned by experiencing the love life of these young shepherds. And then near the end, I pointed out there are morals, and the music changes considerably in the last page. If we could scroll down there, Ibby. Again, these are all familiar. There are lots of trios and smaller combinations of instruments. But at the very end, there are these descending scales that are incredibly beautiful. Now, we all know Coprario wrote some beautiful music, but his 2, 3, and 4 part pieces are quite academic. He was, after all, teaching composition to the young men in the royal classroom, including the future King Charles I and the Laws boys. We know that. But this ending is more in the style of sacred music than Coprario's usual fantasias. And I want to propose that at the end, these morals that are being recited sort of by as sort of a benediction are kind of the transformation of the profanity of a lot of the play. Now, again, I'm not saying it's not profane, but if any of you have read Pastor Fido, it's a pretty steamy work of poetry. It's very sensuous. It's quite specific, and it's very amorous in very detailed ways. And that's what all these teenage shepherds and shepherdesses are doing for the whole play. They're in love with each other. But at the end, the profane is made sacred by this ending that is more like an anthem or a motet than anything else that I know of, and many of you know perhaps even more Coprario than I do. But this ending is in the style of a sacred motet or anthem. It's almost as if it's this wedding benediction at the end. And so the beauty of it is quite special and quite different. So what I want to propose that we do now is that if you have your viols out and you want to play, get out your part to this piece, untitled number 2. And I'm going to ask Ibby to play the YouTube video that I recorded a few years ago with Parthenia. And you'll see we're all wearing masks. This was definitely a pandemic project, both writing the article and doing the videos. And I'll let you play along and see what you think. Ibby and I were looking at it earlier. We may have to put it back at the beginning. Well, now we are reminded of how much we love Caprario's music. I still love that piece, and I've played it and taught it often since the late '70s, and it doesn't grow old for me. I still am moved by it. And I will tell you that I have consulted some with a Marenzio scholar who's actually working on a book about the connection between Marenzio and the poem Pastor Fido. And he says, well, yeah, that's a pretty good match, but I can think of a couple other in Pastor Fido that could match that madrigal fantasia just as well. Uh, well, I want to give you now a little bit more background about why I would be so bold as to look around for matching uh, a madrigal text to that piece of music, because I clearly don't think that it was intended to be underlaid and sung as a madrigal. You can't match up the syllables. But I will say that the Caprario piece that got me most interested in exploring this was one that appeared in Musica Britannica. The other six-part Caprario that appeared in Musica Britannica many years ago was the one that Richard Charteris, later in the early '80s, published as having the Italian text Che mi consiglia amore. We're going to be getting ready to look at that one soon. But what's tricky about this, of course, is that, as I said, Charteris found this fully underlaid madrigal version in California at the Huntington Library in Pasadena. And he saw the title, and he knows a lot of Italian poetry. After all, he's such an expert in things like this. But he couldn't figure out who the poet might have been. And even when he republished these pieces with Peter Ballinger in California in the '90s, he still didn't know who the poet was. And Christopher Field, when writing the article about Caprario for Grove online, is the one that discerned, oh my gosh, this poem is by Petrarch. It was several hundred years old when the Elizabethans would have been reading it around 1600. So it's a Petrarch poem, but Caprario did not use the opening line, so it couldn't be searched. Petrarch's opening line was "Que debio far?" What shall I do? What do you advise me, love? And Caprario started right with the second line, what do you advise me, love? And so it took quite a few years to discern that this was a Petrarch poem. And David Pinto knew about this when he wrote an article in 2005 about the madrigal fantasia. And David Pinto, with great discernment, of course, as you would expect, says, why is Caprario chopping up Petrarch's poetry? Did he and his patrons have any respect for the great Italian poems if they're just chopping it up? And that's a question, as I've been studying this poem and trying to figure it out for years, I asked myself the same question. But I think I might have, if not a good answer, at least an explanation. And so what I'd like to do, maybe if we can we put up the poetry again? And some of you may have noticed, if you looked at the poems in advance, that the text that surrounds it does not follow well. That's because these are just chopped up pages from the published article. They are not the full article. If you want to read the full article, you can go to the Journal of the Old Society of America. But so if we go back quite to the beginning of the poetry, Ibby, is where I expose this. So it'll be one of the first. It'll be the first poem that's revealed here. Yeah. So there we go. So there is the Petrarch poem, and I have put the omitted lines in parentheses so that you can see what Petrarch originally wrote and what Caprario chose from it. Now, Petrarch wrote this poem after the death of his beloved muse, Laura. She died of the plague. Wasn't it ironic to be working on this during COVID, one of our own modern plagues? But so Petrarch's original poem is actually quite tragic. You can see that it's asking, what do I do? My muse is dead. And now let's figure out, why does Caprario chop off those lines and change it into quite a different poem? This is David Pinto's question, and again, which I hope I'm going to come up with an explanation of. So here's sort of the translation of what Coprario ends up with in English. What do you counsel or what do you advise, love? It is the right time to die. Well, I'm pretty sure that Petrarch really did want to die after Laura was gone. And I have delayed longer than I would. My lady is dead, and she has my heart with her. Well, what I want to propose, folks, and this is rather bold, is that Caprario is not setting a poem about Laura having died. He is setting a poem about a little death. And again, why would Caprario do this? He's our ultimate academic. He writes a treatise on how to compose using counterpoint skillfully. Why is he writing a, a poem and setting a madrigal about a little death, which seems a little bit, that's not our vision of Caprario, my God, is it? But I think Caprario this is fairly early Caprario. He's only recently changed his name from John Cooper. I think he's really trying to credential himself as an Italian madrigalist. And this is one of the topics that Italian madrigals deal with. Let's admit it. Madrigals that describe in some way or discuss the experience of a little death. So going on with the English as is presented here is, my lady is dead, meaning originally, of course, Laura died. But in this case, I think the idea is, my lady has already experienced her little death, and then cut out all the Petrarch poetry, and I wish to die with her, but I'm having trouble. So finally, at the ending, all my joy through her departure is turned into weeping. Well, that was really true with Petrarch, but I think what Caprario was trying to express is, yikes, I've had a real struggle experiencing my own little death. I have finally succeeded. And the end is beautiful music. We're going to look at this and when we look at the score. Caprario's setting is clearly at the end not about anguished weeping over the death of his lifelong muse, but satisfied that he's finally experienced the little death he'd had so much trouble getting to. So, Ibby, might we look at the score now? Now, my guess is that many of you have played this piece. I think it is the next one. Yeah, there it is. Many of you will have played this piece, but let's just say it is not popular in evenings of reading through the complete six-part Caprario. A lot of times people play through it once and they say, wow, that's kind of weird, or that's ugly. Do we have to play that again? No, let's go on to another one. So it's often passed over, and I have at workshops sometimes persuaded a group to really work on it. And then they're more interested in it, they're more satisfied in it. But it's hard to read well, and it's hard to make sense of, because parts of it are downright ugly, if you'll pardon me saying so, because they're expressing complicated stuff. So at the beginning, there's this canzona again. You have the pull bow, yum da da da, and you can start your pull bow with a lot of bite because your bow is speaking Italian. Che mi consigli amore. Then you can be more legato for that word, but you get this beautifully constructed set of imitations. Again, Capraro, even when he's young, is a really good contrapuntist, and we know that from the later pieces in 2, 3, and 4 parts. But you can see that goes on for a couple of lines. Let's go down to the next staff there, and you can see around measure 10 that the notes become long, and the text is tempo è ben di morire, that it is time to die. Well, again, could still be about really wanting to die, because you miss your partner so much. But I think this is the beginning of the Caprario's anguish setting of the little death that's not going well. So these are long, anguished notes. You really have to practice your slow bow skills in your concert playing. That's why we practice slow bows, is so we can play passage like this. Then if we go down to the next staff, there we go. Oh, somehow that got chopped out. Well, anyway, there's missing notes here. But the text of My Lady is Dead is done as a 3-part high vocal thing. So it's there. But now, as we look at the ending here, uh, yeah, I want you. Let's go down to the next staff there, Ibby. Yeah, if we yeah, right where we are now, where it says "Onya mia gioia." After the anguished chromaticism of what's before it, we get this joy, which I think is the expression of the little death. And then it says, and this joy is uh, through her departure, all the sweetness of my life is taken away. But my gosh, this ending is one of the sweetest possible, and I do think it's sort of the post little death happiness. You'll see that it's, in fact, if you look at the treble parts right there at measure 35, they are constantly crossing. Again, I think this is the metaphor for the intertwining of the lovers. You get these gorgeous unisons, and then they split off, and the high trebles are constantly shimmering and intertwining. And so I hope I can persuade you that this, even though the ending is so beautiful, the middle expresses the anguish of male difficulty. I'm sorry to say it. I'm not trying to be lascivious here. I'm just trying to propose that this is the Italian madrigalist trying to prove that he can do it. So let's get out the piece of music to your number 6, and we'll play along with this performance. And I got singers to sing along on this, so you can with viols, so you'll be able to hear the Italian text and the really successful Italian madrigal that Caprario has written here.
I think the penny has just dropped in my case, what you meant by little death.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yes. Sorry to be embarrassing, but this is not what we think of Caprario as composing, right? In fact, not many viol pieces could be said to be depictions of a little death. But if you don't mind, I'm going to propose it anyway. So we're ready for the YouTube video whenever it will come up. Well, thank you. So if my sense is that when groups actually have the patience to get through all the difficult sounds and difficult playing problems of the first part, when they finally get to that ending, they love it. But I think I'm proposing an explanation to David Pinto and many others about why Caprario might have dismembered uh, Petrarch's poem. Others had set the complete poem of Petrarch before Caprario did this version of it. Que de Biofar is known in other versions, but I think this is very special and gives us a look at Caprario that we didn't know necessarily existed. I'd like now to look at another one of the fully texted madrigals of Caprario, the one that's Udite, and so if we could look at that poem now, Ibby. Sorry to go back and forth, but I hope this is a way to understand the poetry, the music, and possibly playing it. So I think it might be next in the lineup of poems. Oh, and we don't want the YouTube yet. That is the music. All right. Well, you got a head start on hearing it. So, but if we could look at the poem, I know that was striking. I am so grateful that Ibby is doing this technology because I learned how to do it during the pandemic, but I'm so bad at it that I'm doing the technology, I don't speak clearly. Many of you who've been on Zoom probably know that. Yikes. But I want to think a little bit about this poem, Udite, which is from uh, Pastor Fido. And it was a very popular text to set. There are that we know of. There are 22 surviving settings of Udite. The first one was probably the one by Marenzio, and that's probably yeah. If we go on to the next poem, there, Ibby. Yeah, here it is. Um, so Marenzio got there first, and I speculate, having studied both the Marenzio 5-part setting of this poem and uh, Caprario's 6-part setting, that Caprario was certainly aware of the Marenzio. He kind of pays homage to it, or takes some of Marenzio's ideas and uh, tweaks them a little bit. But here is the famous poem by Guarini from Pastor Fido, and this is a translation by John Steele, who was a very distinguished Marenzio scholar. And you might think when you first read it, oh, it's like it's Dante. Well, of course, it's sort of referring to the Inferno Dante kinds of images, but I want to propose rather boldly up front that it's another Little Death text that is considering this issue, although in a different way than Caprario said it before. So again, well, let's just quickly go through the English translation, and this is a fairly literal one. Hear, mournful spirits of the underworld, hear of a new fate of pain and torment. Look at a cruel love in piteous guise. My lady is more cruel than the inferno, since one death only, and I'm pretty sure this that Guarini meant a little death, cannot satisfy her greedy desire. And then in parentheses, and my life is almost a perpetual death. She commands me to live so that my life receives 1,000 deaths a day, which I think most would say, oh yeah, so she wants him to keep dying and dying, and he can't quite pull that one off. Um, and actually, yeah, I worked a little bit with a translator on this, a scholar who had done his own translations of a lot of Guarini, and he was quite sure that this is quite explicitly a little death kind of poem, but again done with incredible poetic subtlety. My Italian is not particularly fluent, but when I work through it and get help from people who are much better at Italian scholars than me, they'll say, "Oh my God, this poetry is amazing and handled with such nuance and subtlety." And I do want to suggest that Caprario got this one. Um, so I'd like to look at the score a little bit, if we might, Ibby. Um, and a lot of you are going to enjoy when you look at this opening, because it's going to remind you of a 6-part Tompkins fantasia that I'm sure you all know well. So when you look at this opening, I guess we keep going. One more. There we go. There's the udite. Look at the two trebles at the beginning. Remember that that six-part Tompkins goes ya da dee ya da da and goes on and on. I mean, the Tompkins really develops it. I'm pretty sure that Tompkins knew this this Caprario setting, whether he knew it in the madrigal version or just in a purely instrumental version. But you can see that it's this opening text is quite dramatically set. If we just keep going down through it, you'll be able to see that he really exploits that text of the lagrimosi spiriti of Averno, and then when Caprario goes to hell, he goes all the way down with a Phrygian cadence to the low E. If you look right there on just measure 14, when Caprario goes all the way to hell, he goes to Averno on low E, right? Just like Dowland's going to do in Lacrimae. He's going to they that in hell. There's that the Phrygian cadence to the low E. So, wow, all the tropes that we're familiar with. But again, this is another piece that somehow just doesn't get happily sight read if you do an evening of six-part music and try to do all the six-part caprarios. People will play through this once and they'll say, yikes, that's kind of weird and ugly. But again, I'm begging you, give it time. Oh, the way that he sets in measure 22, tormento. Oh, the Italian madrigalisms of the way that Caprario is credentialing himself as an Italian madrigal composer. And he's probably never been to Italy at this point. He probably got there later in his life, but he was only studying Italian madrigals and maybe got to the continent in Holland or something. But he's learning so much about how to compose Italian madrigals, which shows up in his later music. And maybe not so much his music, but in the music of Laws. I want to boldly suggest that Laws is getting some of his issues from having learned how to do this from the old man. So so let's just let's scroll through all the way, if we might, here, maybe to the end of this one. You'll see the crudel inferno more and more, and again at the end we have the mille mille. We have 1,000 deaths, which is a trope from earlier madrigals. Ancor che col partire and Il bianco e dolce cigno, the original White and Sweet Swan, has depictions of 1,000 deaths, which are probably, this idea of luckily being able to experience 1,000 little deaths a day. Can't be done, right? But these madrigalists wanted to suggest the terrible and magnificent possibility of it. So that's what this ending is. It just keeps repeating the text. Mille morte, mille morte. Well, mille morte is expressed with about 14 or 15 repetitions, but that's pretty good for delivering the point. So you can see this ending is this beautiful expression of 1,000 deaths, right? So let's play through the piece and again experience its beauty and its occasional difficulty. It's not always beautiful. It's sometimes ugly as it expresses the inferno and torment and different things like that. Give it a chance, though. It's really beautiful music. And this is with the singers again, of course. Can you get it back to the beginning, Ibby? I think it probably was a little bit farther in. Yeah, there we go. Well, are you willing to give that one more of a chance at your next six-part reading session, or decide to work on it? Again, every time I come back to that, I'm blown away about what a really beautiful Italian madrigal it is, and how intelligently and creatively he has set that text. So I'm asking you to give it a chance, even though parts of it seem a little bit strange. So I do want to move on to one more. We have room for maybe one more to play and discuss, and then there'll be time for some questions and answers. So I'd like to look at one of the other six-part pieces of Caprario's that have an Italian text for which Richard Charteris did identify sections in the in Pastor Fido that are associated with them. So if we're going to look at the one that is al folgorante sguardo. And this comes from a scene in the play where two of the shepherd boys, Mirtillo and Ergasto, are sitting, down and talking together. And Mirtillo is talking about how he how he falls in love with Amarilli, and how he finally gets to kiss her. And so I suppose at its worst, this could be seen as a section in the Tragicomedia where one boy is bragging to the other that he got to kiss the girl, and shouldn't isn't that something to be happy about? And that's a lot of what the play is about, is the trials and tribulations of young love, done in beautiful poetry. But if we could look at Al Folgorante Sguardo, let's look at the poem first. And Charteris figured this out on his own. He figured this out before you could just go online and do a word search. So I think it must be the next one here. If we scroll down, Ibby. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so here it is, and there were so many wonderful translations of this poem done, whether they were literal or more poetic ones done by famous English translators of the past. So al folgorante sguardo is the flashing glance. And so it sounds like Mirtillo kind of gets winked at by Amaryllis, or she gives him a quick glance, and his secret crime, as being conscious of my secret crime, is probably just that he thinks she's beautiful. And then he's struck by her majestic face and emboldened by a serene smile. What's going on? You can see on that page that I'm citing David Pinto all the time. I think David's with us today. I think I saw him on the screen. Ibby, can we go down a little farther? Yeah, so there he goes. I ventured on Ergasto, meaning I kept moving towards giving her a kiss. And then love hides in her lips like a mysterious bee nestled between two new blown roses. I guess those roses are her beautiful lips. Well, again, I have to admit that I don't really know how far Caprario might have imagined this text as being associated with the piece. Here's the rub. Richard Charteris and David Pinto have all pointed out, and I completely agree with them, you cannot underlay these Italian syllables to the fantasias that exist. These madrigal fantasias are more fantasias than they are madrigals. But I want to suggest that the poems or the texts that we can associate with them start to make sense out of the narrative um, of the piece of music as it unfolds. So that let's see if we can make sense of it. It doesn't line up perfectly. You cannot line the syllables up at all with the points of imitation that Caprario writes. I completely agree with that. But I think that this piece of music, I never quite understood when I just played it as a fantasia. And when I started matching the idea of this text to it, it suddenly started to make more sense. So, Ibby, might we go now to the score? Again, this is the Peter Ballinger score, and Peter has given me permission to use sections of this in the published article and in for presentations like this. Some of you may know that PRB has now folded, so they're still selling their stock, but as a company, he's decided to retire. So if we can look at that score, you'll see the uh, the music at the beginning will fit the syllables for just a little while, but not for very long. Maybe are we coming, or is it should I just do a different way?
Sorry, Brent, did you want the YouTube clip now?
No, no, no. The score to the Al Folgorante.
It's up on my screen. Can you see it?
It's not. It's right. We're still seeing the poem.
Oh, okay. Well, it's I've got the score here. Let me see what I can do. One moment.
See, one's going down and another one's going to come up soon. I know it.
I'm just going to stop the screen share and then try
Okay.
again. Okay.
Yeah, that sometimes will work. Yeah, I know. Sometimes screen share has a mind of its
How
own.
about that?
Ah, there we go.
Okay, so we go back to the beginning.
We go back to the beginning. There it is. So you can see that at the beginning, it's sort of the rhythm can be attached to the Italian syllables al folgorante sguardo, and that's about it. After that, it doesn't line up well. But of course, the beginning, as you can see, is quite sober and somber. It's very low, and the voicing is rather close and thick. Um, so in a funny way, the beginning doesn't depict the um, the flashing glance at all. It kind of depicts the being guilty of this crime of finding her beautiful. And then in measure five, the music does start to depict the flashing glance, yum da da dum, and then goes through a extensive set of imitations that you would expect from Caprario. So that seems to be the flashing glance. Lining doesn't line up with the syllables of the madrigal. So you can see this could not be sung and set as a madrigal. I completely agree with the distinguished scholars who've done work on this way ahead of me, that they're right on this one. What I want to propose is that the narrative of the poem starts to make sense out of the piece of music. Uh, and so let's keep going now, almost to the end. I do want to point out something strange and wonderful about this.
Ah.
It's moving. There we go, isn't it? Um, Almost to the end, Ibby, if we could. Yeah, there we go. You'll notice in measure 41, right near the end, that something happens that almost never happens in madrigals and almost never happens in fantasias. The opening music comes back again. So it's not the flashing glance that comes back, it's sort of this sober, somber yom bum bum ba. It's very strange and unusual. So why don't we do this now? Let's pull up the YouTube video, and we'll play along with it, and then I'll just make some closing remarks, and there'll be times for some questions or comments. But if we could have the YouTube video now. People often play this with a lot of sobriety, if you want to call it that, and I want to propose that it's a much more uh, vivid kinds of piece. That yeah, the outer sections are dark, but the intersections are very much like kissing. And I propose that people play them with a little bit more lightness. This one and the next one, Su quella labbra, which I really think is a second part, a seconda parte of this, because it's the following text in the play as well.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, but nothing is coming up yet. I can. Oh, there it is. Well, thank you again. I just love that piece, and I love the buoyancy of the intersections and Su quella labbra, which again follows immediately in the play as a text, is more of the same. Uh, and by the way, I just want to say about those videos, those are all public, those YouTube videos. There, you can find them on YouTube if you just search Coprario and the names of the madrigal or the piece, because they've been doubly released by my university, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, as well as by the Viola da Gamba Society of America, to accompany the published article as examples. So you're certainly able to get to them easily and look at them some more if you'd like to. I think the sound came through pretty well in this, but obviously the video was not well aligned, which if I suspect if you just look at it at your own computer, you can get them to line up better. But they're there. So what I'd like to do now is if there are any comments or questions, I am very open to them right now, folks. You know, some of this is just trying to explain and consider work done by scholars before me, and to try to put this into a context where people who play and perform the music can have even a richer context of how to deal with it. But my ideas are by no means final. I'm always learning and thinking. So any comments or questions are invited and encouraged.
I've got a question. So earlier you said for Udite that there's a six-part Tompkins that has a similar theme at the opening. So how do you know that Tompkins got the idea from Coprario and not the other way around? Because I think they were sort of close contemporaries, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I was just thinking it through a little bit, that it was my understanding that this was earlier Caprario, and that the Tompkins might have been a little bit later. But Ibby, I have to admit, I don't know for sure. It seemed as if the Tompkins might have been expanding on it, since it's those of you who know that piece might know that it's about half the piece is a study of that motive. You know,
Strikingly similar.
Yeah.
Hannah has a question. Go on, Hannah.
Yes, Hannah, please. Oh, yeah. I can't hear Hannah right now, but it looks like she's.
No, still can't hear you. You look unmuted, but we can't hear you, Hannah.
Oh, yeah. Now you're muted. You could type your question into the chat. I would.
Yeah, I think that's what she's doing.
Oh, okay. Good.
While she's doing that, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, of course.
It's just I was looking for your article and on the American website, but I didn't find it yet, and I just wondered if you know which year or whatever it would be
Yes,
in.
it's in volume. It's the 2019 and 20 volume, but it wasn't released until fall of 2021.
Maybe I never got it.
Yeah, we did. I read it.
Did we? All right. Roy's read it, so we must have it somewhere. Thank you.
Of course, yeah.
Brent, could I just ask, when you're talking about dating the pieces, what sort of evidence is there for when any of these pieces might have been written?
That's tricky. I know that the only dating I could kind of get out of the work of Christopher Field and Richard Charteris was that the 5-part pieces that are in madrigal style that have all those Italian titles for which there's no text associated, all seem that they were in the collection of a German noble person in the early 17th century. So they were speculating that these 6-part pieces were from around the same time. But to be honest, there's no hard evidence.
No.
Hannah's question: what sort of audience did Coprario have for his fantasias looking like madrigals?
I mean, his early patrons, who were noble. I mean, it's before he gets to court, so his early patrons would have been, people that knew their Italian poetry well, and so they're and again, that some of them might have been exported to the continent already to a few people that were collecting consort music in Holland or in some of the German courts where they were interested in it, in English consort music or Italian madrigals for that matter.
So Hannah's added another comment there. She's saying that they would have known the poetry. I guess it's these would have been sort of very famous texts that would have been widely read amongst the educated in not just Italy, I guess, around Europe at that time.
Of course, it's amazing how quickly Pastor Fido was disseminated. I mean, that just goes that's 1590, and within 5 years, it's all over the place, and it's getting its first English translations, within 10 or 12 years. But of course, the Elizabethans knew and loved their Petrarch, which is, again, it is hard to imagine that people who knew Che debbio far, the original complete Petrarch Canzona, wouldn't have been somewhat offended by this dismembered version that seems to depict a little death rather than the loss of Laura. But again, it's just another way of, I've been struggling with why Coprario would do that, unless it was just to credential himself as a madrigalist who understood all the tropes and conventions that were going on. And it certainly does that. But I hope you all will give another run through to all these Coprario 6 parts and, be willing to play the ones that don't succeed on the first run through a few times, because they really are rewarding, and give us another look at this composer who is so important to us and that we love, just a different angle than we've thought of him in the past.
Thank you. They do come across clearly online. And I must say, as a composer, we composers do dismember and leave out lines and repeat lines and combine. Look at Allegro nei Penseroso or the Messiah. Mix and match.
Yeah. And maybe a sophisticated audience can appreciate it even more, because they're not stuck on the purity of a text only one way.
Well, thank you very much.
Just one other point on that. I mean, I think a lot of English collectors of music weren't interested in the texts. John Baldwin, for instance, copies 13 Maurizio madrigals. None of them have any text at all. He was interested in the harmony, in the music itself as music. And I think the words might have been irrelevant. So I think you're perfectly right, Brent, in suggesting that we should just enjoy this as music, whether or not we can fit the poems to them.
Yeah, you will see that for those 2 texted madrigals, that if you decide at all to search this on YouTube, that we also recorded them with just viols. And certainly in our minds, we were influenced by having just played it and recorded it with the text. But as pieces of viol music, they are sensational.
They are.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? If so, I think I will say thank you.
Elaine has her hand up.
Elaine?
I was just going to say we'll never see them again. Well, they will never seem the same again after we know the words.
Well, that's good to know.
Mm.
Well, thank you for that.
Any more? Definitely saying thank you now. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening.
Yeah, what an honor to be with all of you and to see so many friends on the screen and others. So thank you for inviting me so much.
We hope you can join us again next month in our next session. Take care in the meantime, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.